Okay, so, and then let me share the screen. Okay, here we go. Okay, so just to review what we were studying yesterday, we learned yesterday that there seems to be a bit of a contradiction because on the one hand, the Gemara understands that when the Torah talks about your enemy and how there's a mitzvah to do prika and te'ina with your enemy's donkey, it's referring to an enemy who is Jewish that you have a mitzvah to bear malice towards. And the reason is because this person is a habitual sinner who flagrantly violates the Torah. Okay, but then we saw another piece of Gemara that says that if you have two conflicting, you have two opportunities on two sides of the street. On one side of the street, you got the donkey of a friend of yours, and on the other side of the street, there's the donkey of your enemy. And your friend's donkey needs te'ina, where there's no tsar balei chaim involved, and your enemy's donkey needs prika, where there's tsar balei chaim involved. Oh, that's weird. I'll just turn this off. And so you have this conflict. So what should you do? So the Gemara says it is more important to do te'ina. I'm sorry, what did I say? Your friend's donkey needs prika. Your friend's donkey is suffering, but your enemy's donkey needs te'ina. Even though normally tsar balei chaim would trump another animal's needs, so even though prika would normally trump te'ina, because the animal that it needs te'ina belongs to your enemy, it is better to work on character development and suppress your hatred of your enemy, and therefore te'ina of your enemy's donkey takes priority over prika of your friend's donkey. That's what the Gemara says. So Tosfos asked the question, what do you mean character development? I thought there's a mitzvah to hate the guy. Why are you developing your character by overcoming your malice? So Tosfos says, no, the Gemara is not talking about the enemy that the pasuk is talking about. It's talking about a guy that you genuinely don't like because he's just a nudnik, but he hasn't done anything wrong. Okay, and there, if you dislike a person, not because of his sinfulness, but rather because he's a pain in the neck, you have an obligation to try and suppress that dislike of a fellow Jew. And you do that by doing something nice for him. You go, anytime you do a favor for someone, by the way, if just as an aside, there's a great essay on the whole idea about how giving engenders love. It was written by Rabbi Dessler. Does anyone have Rabbi Dessler's works, Strive for Truth? Have you ever seen those works?
Yeah, I'm busy working through it right now, Rabbi.
I'm sorry, what's that, Barry?
I'm busy working through that right now.
Oh, good for you. So if you notice in the first volume of Strive for Truth, Rabbi Dessler has a series of discussions on the power of giving, how giving to someone else engenders love, generates compassion and love for another person. Normally, we think that if I receive something from someone, I feel gratitude and love for them. But Rabbi Dessler says an even greater generator of love is when I give to someone, not receive from them, but give to them. And by giving to someone else, I automatically see an association between myself and that person, because that person, now I see a little bit of myself in that person. And since everyone feels connected to themselves, I feel connected to that person because he has now been in some way augmented or enhanced through my efforts. Okay? So anyway, so I just wanted you so therefore the Gemara says, and the way Tosfos explains it, that's what we're talking about when we say that you should do character development trumps even tsar balei chaim. Okay, so that's the basis of this next halacha, halacha yud. Hapogea bishnayim. If you encounter two different people with two different donkeys, echad rovetz tachas hamasa, ve'echad parak hamasa, and so one animal is struggling under its load, needs prika, and the other one already has had its load unloaded off of the back of the animal, velomatza misha yiton imo, and now requires someone to help him reload up the animal. So mitzvah lifrok batachila mishum tsar balei chayim ve'achar kach toin. So if all things are equal, and these are two total strangers, it is a mitzvah to do prika first and then do te'ina, because the prika has the additional aspect of tsar balei chayim, right? And that should be fairly obvious by this point in our studies. Bamed dvarim amurim kishiyihu shneim ohavav o shnehem sona'av. But that's only true if all things are equal, where both people either are your friends or both people are nudniks, guys that you don't like, right? You should start to think that if you encounter two people at the same time that you don't like, maybe there's something wrong with you. But in any event, you encounter two people that you don't like at the same time, do the mitzvah of prika before the mitzvah of tina. But if one is a friend and one is an enemy, mitzvah liton im hasone tchila k'dei lachofes yitzro hara. He says, then there's a mitzvah to assist the person who's your enemy first, so that you suppress your evil inclination, so that you work on character development. Im sona o machmat shechata kenegdo, if this person offended you in some way, in other words, it was purely bein adam lechavero, purely there was some bad blood between the two of you, not because the guy eats cheeseburgers or goes to the strip club, but rather because you and he got into an altercation in the past, and so there's always been bad blood between the two of you. Or it could be bedavar shebimamon, it could be some financial dealing that the two of you had that went south. Sha'asina hi shelo kedas, because in that case, the hatred, the enmity, is not justified. Shenemar v'lo titor et b'nei amecha v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, because the Torah says you're not allowed to take vengeance upon someone. Let's say someone wronged you; they genuinely wronged you. Okay, so if a person wrongs you, you have a right to seek retribution if they financially harmed you. So take him to Beis Din, seek retribution, but then it's done, right? In other words, he's supposed to be your friend again. Do not take vengeance and love your fellow as yourself, right? So the guy ripped you off. You'll know from now on you're never going to do business with this guy ever again because he's a con artist. But the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but you still have to love him. In other words, either you take him to Beis Din, or you take him to small claims court in a situation where you're permitted to do so, and then you abide by the judgment and you move on with your life. There are certain people, I'll tell you a little inside joke that there are people that I enjoy having cholent with, but that I will not have any financial dealings with. You know the type of person I'm talking about? He's a great schmoozer. He's a great guy to have this, you see him on Shabbos, you'll socialize with him, you'll talk with him, but based on things you know about him, you're never going to lend him money and you're never going to have any financial dealings with him. There are people like that, and that's okay, but you're not allowed to hate the guy. And if you do bear him malice, then work on your character. And that's why there's this mitzvah that his donkey takes priority. Aval in sona o kedas, mipnei shera'ahu over aveira. But if your hatred against him is justified, because like in the previous sif we learned that you had seen him committing something sinful in private, o shechata kinegdo b'tziro tsar haguf. He says, or if the fellow did something to you against your person, she'ein tzarech lahasir hasina milibo v'limchalo ad she'yavakesh mimenu mechila, in which case you are allowed to harbor malice against him until he asks you for forgiveness. Kemoshin Yisbaer Ba'Orach Chaim Siman Kuf Nun Vav, as is explained in Orach Chaim chapter 156. Harei ha'ohev kodem love. So if the malice is justified, and we're going to talk a little bit about when malice is justified, so then you should give priority to your friend. In other words, if it's an unjustified malice, work on your character and help the guy that you dislike first. If it's justified malice, then help, because so the guy clearly is not a good person. He's got some real flaws, and this guy's got some really serious flaws, and he's a sinful person. So then help your friend first. Okay, so this really has to be unpacked, and as you can see in the viewer, Imrei Yaakov goes to town on this. Look at that huge amount of commentary. We're not going to go through that, but I just want to unpack it for you, because the difficulty that the Imrei Yaakov has with the text of the Rav Shulchan Aruch is that the Rav Shulchan Aruch seems to say that the only time malice is unjustified is in financial matters. But what if a person does something truly hurtful to you, like he publicly humiliates you? He gets up in shul and starts yelling at you, or he posts something in his social media against you, which really causes you great humiliation. Are you allowed to hate that person? Now, it may be justifiable to be hurt. The question is, are you allowed to harbor that hatred of the person? Now, this is a serious halachic issue. And the part that I love about learning Choshen Mishpat is that it deals with these kinds of issues that you would think that a cold legal text would not deal with. But Torah, right, deals with all aspects of the human condition, including when is a person allowed to allow that hatred to fester within him, and when does a Jew have an obligation to really look at himself in the mirror and do work on character development until he removes that hatred from his heart. There is a halachic dividing line. Now, sometimes the areas are gray, I admit, but at least to have the discussion allows a person to sort of at least weigh these issues carefully and realize that they are halachic issues nonetheless. So what we need to do is, there's a little bit of gray involved in this discussion, and that's what we want to talk about today. So first of all, let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. You should liton im hasone techila. He says it is better to help your enemy first, so that you can suppress your hatred. V'hu hadin im nizdamein shehasone hahu tzarech le'eze tova v'chein ohavot tzarech lazeh ve'ein b'yacholtu lahativ l'shneihem mitzvah b'sone kedei lachuf yitzra. So the Imrei Yaakov says that this is really only one example. This mitzvah of prika and te'ina is only one example in a list of many things that you can illustrate in your mind, where you have two people who are asking you for a favor. Two people are asking you for a favor. You can only help one of them because you only have so much time in the day. Which one should you help first? So if all things are equal, except one person annoys the heck out of you, and the other person is a close friend, so you would think, wouldn't you? Well, help your friend. What's the question? I like this guy. I want to help him. So that's the whole point that this halacha teaches you, that no, you have to say to yourself, why do I dislike this guy so much? Well, I don't like his wife. And, when he talks, he's got halitosis and annoys the heck out of me. You can make up a whole bunch of different reasons, but they're not justifiable reasons for disliking a person, right? So you would think, well, the heck with him. I'm going to go help my friend. What's the question? No, the halacha says there's some, I've got to think about what's wrong with me. I dislike another Jew, I dislike a family member, I've got to work on that. And how do I work on that? Let me take the time to actually get to know him, to help him out with his problem. And that way, I'll truly develop my character better and make me into a better person. Okay? So it's not just mitzvah of Prika and Te'ina. It has so many, much broader applications in real life situations. And if anyone wants to share at this point, you're more than welcome to. Let's see. We don't have Alan Mall on the line. I'm sure he'd have a lot to say about this. But if anyone wants to share, you're more than welcome. Okay. And then the Rav Shulchan Aruch talks about Davar Shebemamon. The Rav Shulchan Aruch talks about if you have a financial issue with the guy, where you feel that he's wronged you financially, okay, then you have no justification to hate him, because once it's done, it's done. You have to take whatever legal recourse channels you have available to you, and then put it behind you. You have no right to bear him any malice. Kagon. So, for example, Shabikesh mimenu shiashilenu eza kli v'lo ratza. He says, let's say, for example, here's would be an illustration of some financial grudge you have against the guy. You wanted to borrow his lawnmower or his snowblower, and he said, no, sorry, I don't lend out my stuff. And you really feel bad, because it would have been no skin off of his nose to lend you his snowblower, and now you got to dig and dig and dig, and it really annoys the heck out of you, or it's going to cost you money to be able to take care of this. And why couldn't he lend me his farblunget snowblower, right? You know, so da'az asr l'sanosa kid amru chazal v'huva birashi, and you're not allowed to hate a person for that reason. It's asr according to halacha to bear a grudge against a person for being miserly towards you or not doing something nice for you. The Torah says, Amarlo hashileni es kardumecha. Rashi says this in Parshas Kedoshim, where it says, Lo tikom v'lo titoret b'nei amecha. You're not allowed to bear grudges or take revenge. And the classic example, says Rashi, is if Ruvain goes over to Shimon and says, lend me please your pickaxe, and Omer lo lav, and Shimon says, no, I'm not going to lend you my pickaxe. L'machar lo Omer lo hashileni et magalecha. And the next day, Shimon goes over to Ruvain and says, lend me your scythe, you know, the thing that you harvest with. So Amar lo heilecha ve'eni kamoscha shalohi shaltani. And so Shimon says to, so Ruvain says to Shimon, here, you can borrow my scythe. I'm not going to be like you, who doesn't lend out his tools. I lend out my tools. Even saying that is usher, because zuhi netira. That's called netira, of bearing a grudge. Even when you're doing the right thing, by lending him your stuff, you're not allowed to bear a grudge. You know, I can't help but feel that, God bless him, Jerry Seinfeld ruined Western civilization in character development, because the whole show is about people behaving badly and then laughing about it. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, it's all about this whole idea. See, we take character development very seriously, but can you imagine they would make a whole show about how Jerry asked Newman to borrow something, and Newman said no, and then Newman asked Jerry, and Jerry said, okay, I'll lend it to you because I'm not like you, right? And then that would be the whole show, and it would be everything. There would be the laughing, and everyone would make fun of it. But the fact of the matter is that that's what the Torah says you're not supposed to do. Shenoter ha'eva belibo, that you bear the grudge within your heart. Afal pisha einono came, even though you're not taking physical revenge, but you clearly are harboring this malice. The dafka bazeh, the afshahanal asa shelo kahogen velokiyim mitzvus kemilos chasadim lahashelo kardumo mikol makom lachata kenegdo b'poyal. Now, it's so the Imrei Yaakov says, note that in this example, Shimon, the guy who wouldn't lend out his stuff, has not done anything actively harmful to Reuven. He just declined to lend him his stuff. Aval im chata mamish kenegdo, gam im ze rak inyan shel mamon bilvad v'lo tsar hago uchagon shegazlo, v'zeh mitzvah l'sanoso ve'in tzarach lachuf yitzra. But if a guy stole from you, and he's committed an avera that not only is between you and this guy, but it's also against Hashem. In other words, let's say he stole from you, and stealing is not only something that he does against me, but it's an avera, and so he's definitely. So when I said before he's a con man, maybe I overstepped it. In other words, if a guy is a known swindler, like a Madoff, so then there's a mitzvah to hate such a guy, right? We're only talking about where a guy has not flagrantly violated halacha, where he just doesn't like to do nice things for other people. He doesn't like to do chesed, or he's an annoying guy, right? So in all of these situations, you don't have justification to hate him. Or there was a conflict between two parties, and it was a financial conflict. Sometimes you have a conflict with your neighbor. Whose responsibility is it to trim back the tree? So he says, I'm not doing it. And you say, well, it's your tree. It's your responsibility. Well, he says, but it's on your property. It doesn't bother me. Well, the halacha is clear. You can take him to Beis Din. Beis Din will paskin what the halacha is. They'll either order him to trim his tree or they won't order him to trim his tree. But once you've gotten to the halachic conclusion of that dispute, you both have to move on. You can't harbor the grudge or the malice because the guy didn't do what he was supposed to do. Okay? All right. So there is a little bit of gray in that, because what if a guy did something financially harmful to you and he doesn't think he did anything wrong and you think that he did? So what's the halacha in that situation? Well, listen, you present to him why you think he owes you the money. And if he says, well, I disagree, then if you're not willing to go to Beis Din over it, because maybe it's $100, right? Maybe it's not worth it to go to Beis Din because it's a pittance of an amount of money. So in that situation, if you're not willing to go to Beis Din to deal with it, you've got to move past it. Got to say to the guy, okay, listen, I think you owe me the $100. You think you don't owe it to me. You know what? It's not important. Our friendship is more important than the $100. Let's move on. And both of you have to have that attitude. That's a halachic imperative, not just the common sense Oprah imperative. Okay. So anyway, so the next thing that we're going to see in the Imrei Yaakov, but if you bear a person malice because he's a sinner, so then there's no mitzvah to go over to help him first. As we said, so in that situation, there's no reason to help the sinner first, but rather you should help your friend first. He says, but there is another Tosfos that we didn't see, and actually we'll take a look at that in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow, that there's another Tosfos in Psachim who actually says that even when the guy is a sinner, you should try and help the sinner first. Elakaven shuhusono gam chavero sone oso. D'chsiv kamayim aponim leponim kein leva adam la'adam. Uvoyin mitoch kach lidei sina gemura v'shayach k'piyas yetzer. He says, Tosfos is of the opinion that if you bear malice towards a person because he's a sinner, he will detect that malice and that hatred, and he will hate you back, even though you don't deserve to be hated. He deserves to be hated, but you don't deserve to be hated. So Tosfos is of the opinion that even if the guy's a sinner, you should actually help him first, because at least that will engender friendship that he will feel towards you. So even though I have a mitzvah to dislike this person and to bear him malice, but he still has a mitzvah to love me. So how do I help him love me better while I'm hating him? I'll do him favors, and that will actually help him like me better, and he'll be able to get over his malice towards me, and then maybe that'll actually help him do tshuva. Who knows? You know what? We'll take a look at that Tosfos in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow. We'll that'll be what we start off with. But so therefore, there's a difference of opinion in the poskim whether, if the person is a sinner, whether I have an obligation to help him first or not. Okay. And then finally, the tzio rotzar haguf, if the person caused you what we call bodily harm. We don't mean that he caused you bodily harm by pushing you down a flight of stairs. What we mean is that he insulted you, that it's not a financial matter, but rather he caused you personal harm, in the sense that he didn't do financial harm to you, but rather he harmed your reputation, he embarrassed you publicly, he does other things, he posts something about you on social media. So then there you have justification to bear him malice. He says, this is also a very gray area, says the Imrei Yaakov, of Aldas Hasma, the Bitzar Haguf Kagon Shiknito, Va'asa Imo, Davar Shalo Kahogan, Bazeh Yesh Kain Mitzvah, Lachuf Yitzra. The Sma, who's the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, does not hold like the Rav Shulchan Aruch. He says that even when a person does something to disparage you and causes you personal harm, right? Not just financial harm, you also have a mitzvah there to get over it. So since it's only a personal matter between the two of you, and he hasn't sinned against God necessarily in any significant way, there's no mitzvah to hate him. He says, and according to the Sma, the only time that I'm not obligated to develop my character again with someone that I dislike is only when he sinned exclusively against God. But if he sinned against me by disparaging me, embarrassing me, harming me in some non-financial way, I still have an obligation to get over it and to develop my character. As we extensively discussed in the Bi'urim section, as I showed you, it's like 2 long pages. He says, our conclusion is that you should really go like the Sma, that the only time that you're not obligated to help an enemy is only when he's a sinner against God. But if he's done something to you personally to cause enmity between the two of you, you always have the obligation to help him first, to be able to suppress that anger and that malice. Right? And he says, and even the Rav Shulchan Aruch himself was not so clear on this matter, and we'll explain why when we continue in this halacha near Tzishem tomorrow. Okay? And this is Alkein Ladina Roy Lahachne Bezekedas Sma. So therefore, you should go like the Sma and always try to suppress your hatred by helping your enemy first. Okay. Questions, comments before we break for today? What?
So a lot of the gray area sounds like it relates to sinas chinam.
Yeah.
To get over our sinas chinam.
I mean, look, the literal translation of sinas chinam is baseless hatred, which means you have no justification to hate this person. So when is there a justification in halacha to hate a person? When he's God's enemy. But if he's not God's enemy, He's one of God. God still loves this guy because he's doing what he's supposed to do towards God. Then I have no justification to hate him. What? Because he harmed me? Who am I? Right? What is that? What basis do I have to hate someone? If I look at myself as being an insignificant person, then what basis do I have to hate him? And that's the principle behind sinas chinam. Okay, so Emir Hashem will pick this up again tomorrow.